Yeah, it's right there. If you just Google search it, it's right there.
Hopefully the dumpster will still be in the garage.
269-6663.
You know, Doug, it's been in the garage for 2 months.
6663.
This is a good one. Yeah. This is all.
You'll feel better than Rachel made a hot bowl of chili for me, so I got it totally man off my door here. Yeah. All right, here we go.
There's still have some more on top of it, so you can still have any good trees. How many houses is it?
I'm gonna make this bigger.
Yeah, definitely want that.
There you go.
Oh, yeah.
Look at that. I think I know what I'm doing.
Remember where we were on there.
Okay. All right, 7 o'clock. Good evening. We'll open the council meeting with the invocation from Jeff.
Let's pray. Father, we pause to thank you for this day, the month of November, heading into December, a time to be thankful. Help us look up as we look forward and work with others, deal with others, love others. Just ask that we keep the right perspective as we enter the holiday season. I also ask that as we look at the agenda tonight, that we have sharp minds and humble hearts. In Christ's name I pray, amen.
Amen. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you, Jeff. All right, well, now that the first snow's out of the way, oh, and hopefully the last, I'm glad you all made it tonight. Let the minutes reflect everyone's here, live. With that, let's look at the approval of the minutes from the November 1st meeting. Those have been presented, and I'd ask if there are any corrections or edits. If not, is there a motion to approve them as presented?
I'll move we approve the minutes as submitted.
All right, is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second that, and as I second, I'd like to thank Cindy. I just look at that laundry list of nonprofit. I want to thank her for her leadership as well as our other committee member, Jerry. So thank you. I'll second that.
All right, any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
I'll abstain.
Mike, you abstain? Or no, Josh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Josh
Yeah,
was
that was me.
absent the last meeting, so minutes reflect 6-0 with one abstention. All right, I'd like to welcome our visitors tonight. Thank you for braving our first cold snap of the year. Let's move into reports. Oral and written communication. Lynn, our Comcast fee has been presented for the third quarter. Looks like about $13,489.14. Okay. And then the October fund report has been presented as well. Were there any questions on that report? I imagine our next guest in our next report will probably speak to those funds, so I would ask if there's no other questions on the fund report. We'll move into, I've asked Jeff Rao to come down from Baker Tilly. They've finished our comprehensive financial plan. Jeff and his group have done a great job. It's been an invaluable tool for the last several years, again, as we use it to budget and guide our capital spending and look at our operational funds and overall try and maintain some real efficiencies with our spending. So, Jeff, it's yours. The floor is yours.
Great. Well, thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to recap this year's summary of the city's comprehensive financial plan. And we'll just go ahead and start off with the next slide. Just a sort of a quick reminder to sort of frame our discussion. I think everyone has seen the comprehensive financial report in the past, so you're very familiar. Again, if not, just a quick again, framework, the purpose of the plan is essentially to provide a financial roadmap for the city. And, particularly in what we've experienced over the last year, 2 years now, going back to 2020 with the pandemic, becomes even more important to have a plan in place that, maintains adequate reserves and also looks ahead at funding the needs and the initiatives of the city. So we, in conjunction with working, and again, well, I should say at the outset, thank you to the mayor and Lynn and Councilman Wilhite for their input in helping to put the plan together, and really department heads. It was really a group effort. Again, but to put together this roadmap that really expands the planning horizon beyond just the next budget year, and allows the city to be nimble and flexible as things change from year to year with a broader, longer planning period. It is intended to be a living document, again, looked at every year as things change, as the city goes through the budget process, to be able to make good, informed decisions based on the information at hand. So that's really the genesis of the report. Next slide. So we're going to start out with the first few slides, just kind of sharing, sort of recapping. Again, this is based on 2020, and then we're projecting out. I know we're pretty far into 2021 at this point, but we'd like to report on 2020 and then look at the next several years in terms of the direction that the city is headed. I really don't have to remind anybody about the challenges of 2020, where public safety was perhaps one of the highest, if not the highest priority. There were so many unknowns into 2020, not knowing exactly what the pandemic, what kind of the impacts the pandemic would have on the financial, let alone health, but also financial condition of the city and the broader community. Potential revenue reductions, COVID-19 expenses, staffing, operational concerns, all those things that were dealt with and had to be dealt with, and in some cases continue to be dealt with. Also, just the overall financial impacts, again, to the broader area, the broader community, residents, local area residents, and just the hit that perhaps some of the residents would take, local businesses, possible impact, economic impact to some of the city's largest business financial drivers, being the orthopedic industry. So again, not knowing, kind of having a lot of unknowns, it was a very, very challenging year. Next slide. Yeah, I'm happy to share with you this evening, I guess from a financial standpoint, if nothing else, the city remained resilient and really finished the year on a strong financial position despite all those challenges. A couple things to note. The city finished with roughly $34.5 million of cash within the city's major civil funds. And all the levy funds exceeded the minimum, what we consider the minimum cash reserve balance to be, which is 15% of operating expenses. So that is a positive. The general fund had about $5.9 million of cash on hand, which equated to about 49% of annual operating expenses. So again, very healthy cash reserve balance, again, well above that 15% threshold. One observation, we did see that revenues compared to budget were about $1.8 million. Well, actual came in about $1.8 million below budget. But again, with that said, the city's cash reserves remain strong in spite of that. And again, the city was able to meet the minimum reserve thresholds. Yep, next slide, okay. So all in all, despite the pandemic, from a financial standpoint, it's fair to say that the city remains strong coming out of it. The schedule that we're showing now, I'm going to share just a little bit, looking back, not just focusing on 2020 and the pandemic, but looking back at historical trends all the way up through 20 and 2021, now that we have budget numbers from the state. This graph shows the net property tax and circuit breaker tax credits going back over the last 10 years. And I know we've showed this in previous reports. I think it's worthwhile to share it again, just seeing the trend in, again, property tax dollars that are coming in, and then also circuit breaker credits or losses that the city experiences in providing tax relief. So what you'll see is, if you kind of, I know these numbers are sort of hard to read here, but going into 2021, net property tax revenues were just shy of $13.8 million. If we compare that going back to 2012, we were just shy of, the city was just shy of $10 million. So a good amount of increase over that 10-year period. So we have steady growth in property tax revenues in spite of the fact that the circuit breaker losses continue to go up as well. So when we look at 2021 circuit breaker losses, which totaled $788,000 compared to 2012 of $327,000, that is revenue that the city loses that has to be made up somehow. So again, with that tax revenue coming in, and we look at the growth of the circuit breaker, which is roughly 38% of the total circuit breaker in the county, that can be a heavy lift. So again, the city continues to perform financially despite the circuit breaker losses growing over the number of years. Next schedule. So this is just a quick graph that illustrates how much of the circuit breaker losses, about $2 million roughly, how much of the share represents the city's share. So roughly 37%, and that's followed by the school of 34%, and so on and so forth. So the city makes up the overwhelming or the largest portion, I guess I should say, of the tax credits that are applied within the county and the overlapping units. Next slide. So this graph, again, is another illustration that shows compares the tax rates with the net assessed values. So the net assessed value, again, is, or the tax rates rather, are a product of the net assessed value and the levy. And a couple things to note. Good news, net assessed value continues to grow. So the city is growing in terms of overall value, adding businesses, adding residential homes, what have you. As of 2021, we were looking at about $1.1 billion. Looking back to 2012, the city was at $870 million. So about a 28% increase over that period of time. You'll also notice the tax rate, which is the green line, going all the way back to 2012, the tax rate was 1.0778, and this is just the city only, by the way. And in 2021, the tax rate was 1.1967. So roughly, what is that, 11% increase. So a couple takeaways, the growth in the assessed value has helped to control or maintain that growth in the tax rate. And so that's what we're seeing here. Next schedule. So this graph shows looks at the ending cash balances of the selected operating funds of the city. Again, going back to 2011, the selected funds were totaled roughly $11 million, just under $11 million, $10.95 million. At the end of 2020, well, actually in 2018, we saw sort of an increase, 2017, 2018. which reached a top line of about 13.2 million. Now that's reduced over the last 2 years, or come down over the last 2 years, down to $11.78 million. So again, very strong cash position, particularly as we're coming out of a pandemic year. Next schedule. So this shows the trends in spending for, again, those selected operating funds. And over the last 10 years, we've seen an increase in spending, annual spending of about 32%. So roughly $20.9 million in 2020 compared to roughly $15.8 million dating back to 2011. So if you kind of break that up into annual increases, it would be slightly above what sort of average inflation would be over the last 20 years. Next schedule. So actually the next several schedules we'll sort of pivot a little bit, and what we've done is we've looked at how certain performance indicators. So this is a comparison of the city of Warsaw to 7 other similarly sized communities in terms of population, just to give the city a sense of how you're performing financially in these certain areas. First one is assessed value in 2020. Again, city has very strong assessed value, above the average, not quite the max, but certainly above the average in terms of assessed valuation. Circuit breaker credits, a little bit below average compared to some of those other communities of similar size. Next schedule. When we're comparing property tax levy, the graph on the left, again, about almost 13.8 million. The city's tax levy, is the highest of all 3 of those. But again, looking at the tax rate, the graph on the right, which shows a tax rate that's below the average, somewhere between the minimum and the average, again, just goes to show that that growth in assessed valuation and controlling of spending is keeping the tax rate within reasonable levels and below the average compared to those other communities. Next schedule. So in looking at debt, the city has or had about $6.47 million in outstanding tax-supported debt. So pretty low compared to those other communities, so not as highly leveraged, if you will. And when we look at debt per capita, again, the city is well below the average at $477 per capita. And lastly, cash balances, and we've kind of already touched on this, but the city continues to maintain a very healthy cash reserve balance, 37.4 million roughly, which is above the average compared to those other communities. All right, so where do we go from here? Accelerating out of the pandemic, 2021 and beyond. Some considerations or driving factors, obviously, continue to deal with COVID and look at the possible revenue losses related to COVID and also COVID-related expenditures. I think it's probably fair to say that where we stand now, probably most of us feel much more comfortable from a economic impact standpoint, financial standpoint, compared to where we were maybe back in mid-2020 as things were really just heating up in terms of the pandemic. Losses really were not as, sort of painting broad brush here, but really were not as bad from a local government standpoint as what we thought perhaps might happen. But nevertheless, we'll continue to keep our eyes on those revenue trends and economic impacts. The other major driver in the plan are capital projects, and that's kind of where we'll we'll head next on the next slide. So within the plan, what we wanted to do is just kind of highlight certain higher dollar projects. That's what we've done here with this schedule. Within the plan, there are roughly $25.9 million that are projects that are cash funded, so sort of pay-as-you-go type approach. Some of those notable projects are the Mariners Drive, about $3.25 million. The capital plan assumes utilizing Northern TIF funds for that project. The Anchorage Road project, almost $1.5 million, again, utilizing some Northern TIF funds. 300 North Phase 3 project, about $1.8 million. 200 West Road project, $1.2 million. Owens redevelopment, $1 million, and then Southern Residential Lift Station, about $1.2 million. So all these projects are included in the plan, again, totaling roughly $25.2 or $25.9 million, and the plan assumes that these are cash funded. Next schedule. There are two other notable projects that we've assumed within the plan to be bond funded. Totaling $3.2 million. The first is the Pavilion Remodel and Park Offices project, $3.2 million. Some of that to be paid for with future bonds, a portion of that to be cash funded. And then the new Public Works facility, estimated approximately $10 million, again to be funded with future debt, future bonds. So next schedule, throwing a lot of numbers up here. I'm not going to go through all these numbers, but kind of focus on just a couple highlights. But what this schedule shows are the ending cash balances, actual cash balances for each fund that we looked at within the plan, going back to 2019 and then 2020. And then we have the projected ending cash balances for 21, 22, and 23. So you'll notice, again, just focusing on the general fund, maybe first, end of 2020, the ending balance was almost $5.9 million. We're projecting growth in the general fund in 2021, 2022, and then a little bit of a decline, slight decline in 2023. But overall, over the projected period, it would be a net positive gain within the general fund. On the next schedule, you can see sort of the trend in total fund balances. So again, ending 2020, roughly $34.5 million, which was a reduction compared to 2019, or reduction in cash. 2021, we're expecting a positive cash flow of about $4.9 million, or 14%. And then for 2022, 2023, we're projecting some negative cash flows in those years in total, again, primarily driven by capital projects as well as inflationary increases in costs. So roughly 3.9% in 22, and then about 10%, 11% in 2023. So some of the takeaways. I've already mentioned some of this, but again, strong cash position at the end of 2020, about $34.4 million in cash and investments. $5.9 million represented funds held within the general fund, a good healthy cash reserve in general. Projected years 21 through 23, we're projecting a decrease of approximately $750,000 over that 3-year period. And the decrease is primarily attributed to the capital spending and, as I said, general increases in cost over that time period. Next schedule.
Jeff, can I ask you real quick?
Sure.
How does the loss of the motor vehicle highway funds that they're predicting for us affect that? I saw you had those in red.
Yep.
And I know we thought they would hit us in a couple years.
Yeah, so so this is up a couple schedules, but we're projecting based on the capital projected capital needs, capital projects, that we could be looking at a negative cash position for MVH restricted, which what we'll look at, and we're looking at some possible solutions for that, or we offer up some possible solutions for
Okay.
that. But, you know, obviously city wouldn't go into a negative cash position. So projects that are expected to be funded out or projected to be spent out of MVH restricted, we would have to look at utilizing other funds to absorb those projects. Or some of those projects may have to be delayed or pushed out.
Okay, thanks.
So does that answer your question? Okay.
Jeff, Lynn just asked me a question, which I think was a good question. Did you all have a chance to react to our population increase and the per capita funding for revenue in some of these funds, in these projections? I know it's not a huge amount, but it certainly is, I guess, worth mentioning.
Yeah, we haven't. So I guess you could say we've taken a conservative approach. So, well, let me say this. So in terms of increases in population, so that could affect a couple of things. It could affect the income tax that the city collects. We have not built in any increases in that as a result, so we're somewhat being conservative. But certainly those are benefits that could be, help this financial picture look better down the road. At this point, again, we're just being conservative. We hadn't built in any additional financial impacts as a result of that.
Thank you.
So a couple of alternatives to consider, which we've included in the report. Some of these are probably sort of go without saying, so to speak. But alternative one, couple things the city, and I know the city has done this in the past. Most of these aren't new. But look to perhaps shift some of the property tax levy in the future from one fund, healthier fund, to another fund that perhaps isn't as healthy, or you're projecting deficits in certain funds. So that's not generating new revenue. That's just sort of moving revenue from one fund to another to help offset potential shortfalls. Alternative two, undertake a review of all city fees to ensure that they are adequate to recover the cost of providing services. I know the city has, I think, already kind of started looking at some of those things. For example, licensing fees, permitting fees, park fees, those types of things. A lot of times those fees that are established and sort of set in stone for whatever reason, and they're not always looked at frequently. But those fees can be become outdated, just like any other user fees. So we're always recommending taking a look at those and making sure that they're adequate to at least offset the cost of providing that service. Next schedule, alternative three, consider utilizing a larger portion of EDIT or CCD funds to pay for capital projects. And Councilwoman, this is kind of where we were, or what I was referring to, and looking at utilizing other healthier funds. EDIT, CCD are just a couple of examples that can be used for any legal purpose. So they could certainly be used to help pay for MVH restricted projects or fire territory equipment projects. Alternative four, utilize additional TIF number 2 funds to complete portion of capital plan that benefits or is connected to the northern TIF area. And I know this is, again, something that Jeremy and others are always looking at, utilizing or leveraging TIF funds for projects that are eligible to be used and can help offset some of those potential shortfalls in other funds. Alternative 5, continue to pursue competitive grant opportunities. Most of you are probably aware of the NDOT grants, the newer EDA grants, SWIFT grants that are a result of the American Rescue Plan. I know the city has already tried to and applied for some of those funding grant programs. But some of those continue, so there's still opportunity there. We're still early on in that process. As most of you probably have heard, and I didn't look at the news today, but I saw that I think the federal infrastructure bill was to be signed. I don't know if that happened today or not by the president. But that's certainly going to, once that happens, that's certainly going to infuse dollars that we're just frankly not used to seeing coming into local government. Dollars that can be available for transportation, utilities, infrastructure, broadband, an array of infrastructure projects. So again, looking ahead to potential funding sources for projects through the federal infrastructure bill as well. Alternative 6, to the extent that the city is unable to cash flow certain capital projects, there's the ability to pay for those through the issuance of debt, general obligation bonds or lease rental bonds to help fund those capital projects and spread those out over a number of years. And we did calculate every local unit has a bonding capacity limit that you're able to bond and use tax dollars to repay. The city's bonding limit back in 2020, at the end of 2020, was roughly $4.5 million. Say it another way, the city could issue up to $4.5 million of tax-supported bonds for projects and still stay within the constitutional debt limit of the state. Now, that's not to say that the city couldn't issue more than that. We certainly can. It just requires a different mechanism, bonding mechanism, to issue more than the $4.5 million. Alternative 7, just quickly, and I know the city does this on a continued basis, but just monitoring budgeted disbursements in those operating funds. The city has expended historically approximately 90% of the annual budget. So rarely has the city spent all the way up to its budget every year. Alternative 8, actively pursuing refunding opportunities on outstanding bonds. And I know that, again, this is something that the city and the Finance Committee does on a regular basis. One example of that is the city just refunded one of the sewage works outstanding bonds of 2011 just earlier this year. So again, always looking for ways to not only generate new revenue, but reduce expenses and reduce costs, and that's one way. And the last schedule in terms of finding proposed action plan, reduce or delay portions of the city's capital plan. We're not suggesting that here tonight, but again, just something that can be considered in particular funds that may be projecting, or we may be projecting some cash shortfalls. All right, so just to kind of wrap things up, most of you are very familiar at this point with the American Rescue Plan, and again, just kind of thinking about looking ahead to potential funding sources for these capital projects, which could help leverage, help boost, or enable the city to perhaps do even more projects. Looking at American Rescue Plan dollars, I know the city will be receiving a little over $3.4 million in funding through ARP. We've kind of listed out here. I won't go through all of them individually, but some of the eligible uses of those funds, and one of those is revenue recovery, or revenue loss recovery. And we've worked with the city to go through those calculations, and I think we came back to a pretty sizable number in terms of what the eligible losses could be accounted for. I think we were around 3.1 million. So certainly that's an eligible use. Obviously, investments in water, sewer, broadband infrastructure is another area where we're seeing lots of activity in terms of use of those dollars. And lastly, again, this is just sort of a recap or summary. Outside of the city's direct allocation, there's other competitive grant programs. I've already kind of touched on these. EDA, the state programs, whether it be SWIFT or stormwater transportation grants, all those are potential opportunities to again leverage and sort of extend the city's dollars, if you will, to take on more projects. And then lastly, as I mentioned, we continue to follow and track the infrastructure bill as we learn more about that. But certainly that's going to be a game changer as it pertains to infrastructure. So it'll take a little while to get all our arms around that, I suppose. But as we know more, we'll certainly pass that along to the city. So with that, appreciate the opportunity. I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has.
I think you all have a copy of this presentation in your board pack, and I know you've all had copies of the comprehensive plan that's been sent out. I think there's even paper copies available of that provides more detail. My favorite slide is the one that's showing our increased assessed value going up and our taxes going down. If I had to boil it down to my favorite. But I know you've all had a chance to look at this, and certainly would welcome questions or concerns or trends or anything with Jeff here. I know they've worked hard to present this in a digestible format, and that's our goal, is to make it easy for you all to see the direction and transparent as well where we're going. So, all right. Questions?
The only thing that jumped out at me, really jumped out, is back about halfway through the presentation, the circuit breakers. Our circuit breaker losses were less than average, which is good. How does that happen? How do you explain that?
It's really unique to the specific county that we're in and the other overlapping units. So every county is a little bit different, and there's a lot of there's not an easy way to say this is why. There's a lot of layers that go into what drives circuit breaker. But I think it's an indication at a very high level. It's an indication of the financial health of overlapping units in Kosciuszko County. So the county, the overlapping units, the city of Warsaw. Again, going back to the mayor's point about assessed valuation has continued to grow and outpace, I'll say outpace spending and outpace levies. And that's helped sort of keep or drive the rate down, the tax rate. So if we're to see the opposite, if we're seeing where assessed values are remaining stagnant in certain counties, we see levies continue to grow. That's where we see tax rates continue to grow. And as we see tax rates continue to grow, then that's going to exacerbate the circuit breaker loss issue. So it's really a broader community. I think it's an indication of the strength of the county's financial position and all the overlapping units in the economic growth that's occurring within the county.
That's a common question that I have, and when I travel the state and talk to different mayors, every county has a different makeup of their, as Jeff said, of their residential properties, of their farmland, of their industrial properties, and it's just that combination. If you remember, there's a 1% cap on residential. there's a larger cap on some of the industrial. I think what that means is the more properties that you have in residential, maybe you're top-heavy in residential properties, there's more chance that the circuit breaker is going to impact those residential properties. But as Jeff said, every county has got a absolutely different makeup of their assessed value and those different types of properties that are specified in the state constitution, that either 3%, 2%, or 1% circuit breaker.
Yeah, I just thought that was very interesting. Thank you.
I mean, I talked to a mayor today, he's got 35% circuit breaker in his community, 35% of his tax rate. Okay,
All right, well, thank you.
yeah.
Thanks for your time. Hope that was helpful. Yeah, I guess as you continue to review or go through the more detailed report, if there's any questions, feel free to.
Are you going to stick around for just a little bit? Because we wanted to
Yep.
discuss that 1782 issue as well.
Sure.
All right, thank you.
Yep, thank you.
All right? All right. Well, I think it's time to move into our new business. Again, unless there are any questions. Jeremy, I'm going to ask you to come to the podium and present the petition for voluntary annexation and explain to the council what you'd like to accomplish tonight. And
Not really accomplishing a whole lot, but speaking of growth, one of the ways we grow is obviously annexation and promoting new development, which this is a 70-acre annexation into the city of Warsaw. We've targeted this property for the last few years for potential residential growth, and Mr. Custer is requesting it be annexed in for a residential subdivision. This is the first step, so it's just a petition, so you're not voting on it. You're just basically acknowledging that he's petitioned the city. And then there will be some steps next with the public hearing and ordinance and a plan that will be presented in the near future.
the map is there. I think Jeremy can maybe give a quick overview of where this property is, where it touches the city.
Yeah, so it's off of Old 30, but just north of Corridor Drive. We've worked with Mr. Custer and the cell tower company to obtain an easement. The sanitary sewer will come in off of Corridor Drive and provide service to that residential subdivision from the south. Shadow Lakes is just off a little bit to the west, and that is part of the city. And then all of Corridor Drive is in the city.
Questions? So as Jeremy mentioned, tonight we're just asking you to acknowledge that there indeed is a petition for voluntary annexation for one property owner, and just like just a consensus, a show of hands that you're acknowledging this, and that's about all we're doing tonight. So Lynn can record that. All right, thank you. Thanks, Jeremy.
Yep.
All right. Our next item is a transfer request from Fire Territory. I believe Chief Wilson is on. Can't get him unmuted.
Good evening.
There he is. You're on, buddy.
Happy snow day. So yes, I'm coming to you to, when we did line 2 cuts, we changed some things and, which you're gonna see come up. But I'm asking permission to transfer $15,000 from the Fire Territory Operating Fund 360, which is our repairs and maintenance, to the operating fund of 220, which is operating supplies.
And Mike, what are those funds going to be used for?
We're gonna be real tight at finishing up the, everything that goes underneath 220, fuel, and the supplies will be coming in.
All right. Questions? All right, again, this is from 360 repairs and maintenance to 220, operating supplies, the amount of $15,000. Is there a motion to approve Resolution 2021-1105?
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, thank you. Thanks, Mike. All right, several weeks ago, I solicited spending reductions for this 2021 budget year. I think you heard Mr. Rao talk about the city typically doesn't spend all that's allocated, and as is tradition here in the city of Warsaw, the department heads return that money, and that will help us as we navigate our 1782 notice and try and set our reserves at healthy levels and look forward to the 2022 allocations. So with that, I think you can see the total amount given back this year was $1.463280, so just a little under $1.5 million. And all of those returns you can see are enumerated. I won't go through all of them, but you can see by department those amounts that were returned. Lynn, any comments?
No, but you explained it really well. That's when Chief Wilson discovered that they were a little short on something, so he had to change his, but he still came out with a pretty good amount to take out of their budget for this year.
Yeah, the fire territory returned $245,330. So again, that total is just under $1.5 million of unspent allocated funds for 2021.
And this will go into our reserves then for next year.
Questions?
I'll make a motion, we approve declaratory resolution 2021-1104.
All right,
I'll second that.
all right. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution 2021-1104 passes unanimously. All right, and there's another transfer here. This is the Common Council budget. This is moving some money from machinery and equipment to communication and transportations to help cover part of the annual IT contractor services. If you remember right, we had funds set aside actually as a paid employee in the mayor's budget, and we have since contracted those funds rather than using that amount of money. So this is just moving it, let's see, from machinery and equipment from 445 into 320, in the amount of $25,000. Questions? Hearing none, is there a motion to take action on Resolution 2021-1110?
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Again, let the minutes reflect Resolution 2021-1110 passed 7-0.
Just real quick, on the resolution itself, it says it's 1106, and in our
You're right.
minutes, it says 1110. So,
Okay,
Agenda was wrong.
got it.
yeah, so just,
All right, so let the minutes reflect it's Resolution 2021-1106.
Got it.
Thank you. Thanks, Diane.
yeah.
Okay, last item of the evening. I know we've been discussing this for a while, and we've had some requests to take a look at this. I know there's some discussion that has been had, and I know there's probably some varying opinions about this fireworks ordinance. I asked the council president to prepare an ordinance that could be debated publicly, and I think he's done that. This ordinance takes into account the first three tenants in 6702 is from the IC code 221114-1005, and those are by state statute. The new item is item D, and the restriction would be that Fireworks would be permitted between the hours of 5 and 11, the remaining Fridays and Saturdays throughout the year. So if they weren't included in the original state statute, it does allow the use of consumer fireworks between 5 p.m. and 11 p.m. on just Fridays and Saturdays for the rest of the year. So I think with that, I'll ask City Attorney if there's anything else I've overlooked as I presented this, and then I'll ask Jack, who has brought this to the council, to comment as well, and then we can have discussion.
Well, I think one thing that this ordinance is specifically intended to do is not include some of the things that are listed here, such as model rockets, toy pistol caps, signal flares, and some of, I guess I would consider them smaller type, not noisy fireworks, such as sparklers, cones, fountains, wheels, ground splinters, snakes and glowworms, those kind of things. So those would not be included in the definition of the consumer fireworks that would be unlawful to use at certain times within the city. The majority in 6702 A, B, and C, those are all state statutes. We're not allowed as a municipality to govern those periods of time. That's retained by the state, and they govern those days and times for fireworks displays. I think what this ordinance would do would include what's under 6702. Basically, it would add the additional limitation in the city of Warsaw that on Fridays and Saturdays throughout the year that are not contained in the state statute, they would not be allowed during the hours between 5 p.m. and 11 p.m.
Could you state that again?
That,
Because that sounded,
that they would only be allowed on Fridays and Saturdays between the hours of 5, 11 p.m. The remaining time they would not be allowed if they were not between the hours of 5 and 11 p.m. on Fridays and Saturdays.
okay. Yeah, that's one of the things that has been rather confusing with this whole fireworks issue and the way the state has written it, and is when you first read it and the way you state it, a lot of times it actually means opposite of what you're saying. For instance, a lot of people will say, I think we should only allow what the state allows us to do. And currently, the state allows us to allow fireworks every day between 9 in the morning and 11 at night. It does not allow us to do it between 11 at night and 9 in the morning. And this is something, too, that I think has been a little bit misunderstood, because there is state statute or state code which declares that from 11 at night till 9 in the morning is a quiet time, and fireworks are not to be allowed to be shot off during that time. So there is something already in place, I guess is what I'm saying. It may not be to the degree that we would like for it to be, but there is something already there. I had somewhat prepared a presentation that I think has been pretty much covered by the mayor and by the city attorney. The first section that was talked about was 6701, and that's simply a way to try and determine what is covered under this ordinance. Please, Scott, chime in if I get this wrong. Fireworks is somewhat of a generic term to a lot of people, and so therefore we've made the attempt to try to describe what is and what is not a fireworks as it is considered underneath this ordinance. We've talked about the times, and in particular, what this body is allowed to do. And we have discussed it, and I have come to the position that I would be willing to restrict, I think it's about 85% of the time that we're available to restrict it, and yet allow fireworks between 5 p.m. and 11 p.m. on Fridays and Saturdays. And this would hopefully be kind of a help to some of our ethnic groups within the city. There are a lot of people who like to use fireworks as part of celebrations of weddings. Forgive me if I say it wrong, quinceañeras, I think it's called. And this would provide some relief for them to at least be able to fire off some fireworks during their celebrations. So I'm behind this. I think it's it's a good compromise. I'll say it's weighted towards the restrictive side. But I think it's a good compromise. And in this community, I think in any community, I think, compromise is good. And I would hope that this body would be able to do that.
All right. So, obviously, it's a pretty basic addition. One sentence, one section. So, first want to make sure everybody understands what's being proposed here. If there's not any questions, I think it's probably important for you all to deliberate about this, give your opinions, and let's see if there's a consensus, at least potentially tonight, to consider it on first reading.
I appreciate the effort from this body, our attorney, people in the community, trying to, like Jack said, come to some sort of compromise where we're finally, addressing it, and we're promoting as much freedom as possible, but also encouraging people to be good neighbors. 99% of the time, people are good neighbors, and the give and take and the back and forth that can just be solved on everybody's own time without the public getting involved. I just think that this is a great step. I appreciate Jack, conversations with Mike and others, and then again the attorney and probably the mayor helping put something together. The one thing that I also like is it's in not only how the fines are set up, but even before that, the code. Where is that? What section? I read that. It's in 67.04, where vendors in the community will have this on display, just so people know what the guidelines are. Oftentimes they don't know. And knowing is really going to help us over the next year or two as we try to see, is this working? And I just appreciate it, and I'm certainly willing to try. I understand both sides of the continuum here, but I think this has hit the mark, at least in my seat. So again, thank you.
Yeah, I apologize for not going over 04 and 05. They are a little bit different, have been added from our base that we started with. 04 says that vendors shall be required to post Warsaw City Ordinance Chapter 54, Section 6702 and 6799 fireworks in full and legible size and font at the point of display of their fireworks within their establishment. One of the things that we had discussed was, you know, from year to year, we don't deal with this every day. Hopefully, we don't deal with it every day. And because of that, from year to year, it tends to get forgot what the rules are. And so by putting this in, what we're doing is we're asking or we're telling the vendors that they need to post what the times and penalties are for using fireworks in and out of those times. The Warsaw Police Department will be charged with enforcing the provisions of this entire ordinance. Warsaw Wayne Fire Territory, through the use of commercial inspections, shall be charged with enforcing .04, which is the public display or the posting of times and penalties. This is done merely to make sure that every year, when somebody goes to buy some fireworks, there's a sign there that says, remember, this is when you can do it, and this is how much it costs you if you don't. So I thought that was a rather good addition to the ordinance, and we probably wouldn't have come up with it had we not had so many discussions and made sure that the Warsaw Fire Department, Police Department, the mayor, and the city attorney weren't involved as well. So I'm particularly pleased with that section.
I guess I'm still struggling a little bit with it, and I do think this is a great start based on some of the people that have reached out to me, particularly people with pets, small children, people that work weekends and so forth, and veterans. I've had several people reach out to me, and they're concerned about allowing them, 52 weeks a year, 2 nights a week. I guess for the most part, I really, between now and the next meeting, would love to hear from more people on it.
And I think that's a good point, Cindy, because for this to work, it's going to require community involvement. People are going to have to step up and say, hey, I saw this, I witnessed this, it needs to be addressed. And you would hope that people could go first and address people, and say, hey, you're in violation. You woke my 8-year-old up Wednesday night, couldn't get back to sleep, had a hard time getting up and going to school in the morning. But, hopefully people would think about those kind of things, but we don't always. And so sometimes we have to have things that remind us like this. But the community is going to have buy-in in order for this to work. And so people need to get involved and let us know. I mean, I'm also hearing from people, and it's mainly if we could get them away from when my kids have to go to school or when I have to get up and work early the next morning, that would be great. So I think this, as it's presented, does do that.
And I agree. It's going to take the community really to step up, because I know I've had several people contact me, but as far as those people actually coming forward, and making a public statement or anything, so I just don't know what to do if they're not willing to do that.
Well, my wife, of course, she listens to some of these firecrackers going off, but they're not in my community. I don't know who's doing it. Now, these people that live in the same area where those are going off, if it's a bother to them, they should be the ones that would put up the protest, as much as that goes. And it'd be kind of hard to squeal on your neighbors sometimes. You don't want to make them mad. You got to live beside them or across the street from them or something. But I've seen times when I would probably do that.
Yeah, I think that's what I've heard from people. They don't want to report because they don't want to get their neighbors angry or whatever.
The Friday and Saturday night, though, does give Diane Quantz an opportunity when I'm lighting them off on Tuesday and Wednesday. Jeff, did you know that you can light them off on Friday and Saturday? Oh, I didn't know that.
So wait
Or-
and celebrate the Warsaw Tigers win
You
then.
got it, yeah, or the elementary game you were at tonight. Or it could be, I'm lighting them off at 2 o'clock in the morning, or one of my wonderful teenage boys a few years ago would be doing that. You could come over and say, now, Jeff, do you know they can, but they need to, by 11 o'clock, be done. I like the parameter, freedom, but also parameter to help neighbors get along with each other. And who knows, we may have 100 people in here saying Friday and Saturday night is too much. But I think it's the off and on, the goofy hours. I hear them at times, and it doesn't bother me as much, but maybe it would with another neighbor of mine. I don't know. Again, it provides parameters. That's what I like about it. So.
I know we've heard from folks over the years that do have a problem with it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And just for the record, we can certainly speak to that, but I do appreciate you all taking a look at this to try and address the peace and quiet of our lovely neighborhoods. And I'm, again, appreciative of what's being presented here.
Josh, you have anything? Do you want to go? All right, I'll go ahead and go. Jack and Mike and I have talked a lot of hours about this, so.
For 5 months.
Yeah, for 5 months, so here we are. My biggest issue here, I think, with all of this, a few points I'll make. One is I think it's going to be really hard to enforce. I think our police staff is already short-staffed. I'd certainly hate for them to run around chasing their tail on a fireworks issue and they can't actually find the culprit, potentially. So that's one of my issues that I have. I just think our police force is better served prioritizing some other things in front of fireworks. So I think enforceability can be an issue. To Jeff's point, I do think hopefully, I have great neighbors, but I know some people maybe don't get along with them. So hopefully 99% of people are good neighbors. I think one of the issues, obviously we've talked about it already, is that there's not a whole lot of participation in making that phone call. So I'd really like to hear from the police. How many calls have they received over the years? Have they received any? Because if they haven't received any, there's no point in us enforcing anything because nobody's going to continue to participate. It would kind of be an endless cycle, in my opinion. And then lastly, I do think that currently the way it's written in the state statute, there's no recourse. So if I did have an issue with my neighbor, my first step would be to approach that person. Obviously, if they were not very agreeable, you pick up the phone and call. Well, as it stands, there's no recourse. Maybe a slap on the wrist, maybe a knock it off, potentially a nuisance. I'm not in law enforcement, so I don't know what you can divvy out and hand out. But maybe instead of reducing and restricting 85% of the fireworks usage, maybe we can just tack on some recourse. I'd be fine with even doubling the fines to just really make sure that people understand that this is a serious offense. And so that way, if they do get caught and they do get called, there's a $300, $600 fine. I know that would make me stop. So I think before we just jump to saying, let's just make these pretty large restrictions. Again, Jack said about around 85% approximately. Why don't we instead provide some immediate recourse? And if that doesn't work, then of course, let's continue to restrict it until this problem can solve itself. I just think that this is a bit of a drastic measure out of the gate.
may I address one point?
Certainly.
The, you know, we talked about IC 2214. And we had a meeting between the mayor, the attorney, city attorney, police chief and fire chief, and myself. And in that meeting, it was asked whether or not we needed anything else to enforce this IC 22. And it was stated, I believe, Scott, that it was stated by our police chief that no, there would not need, we would not need anything else. We do not need an ordinance to enforce those hours between 11 at night and 9 in the morning. The penalty for that is a Class C infraction,
Okay.
which carries with it up to $500 fine.
Okay.
And I see the city attorney nodding his head. So there is that on the books current without us doing anything.
Scott, can you kind of confirm that or verify that?
Yeah, that's true. So under Indiana law, if you set fireworks off between later than 11 p.m. or earlier than 9 a.m., except for those certain designated other times, it's a Class C infraction. And a Class C infraction can be finable up to $500.
Okay.
Thanks for clearing that up. I appreciate it.
There again, it takes somebody to, one of the neighbors, to turn them in, right? Because the police aren't just driving around the streets waiting for somebody to shoot up a firecracker or something like that.
Anyone else?
Well, I guess I'll go. I last one. I tell you, I have so many thoughts on this. I'm not even sure where to begin. I've probably had more contact from people, constituents and not, people who live in the city concerning this issue, probably even more than chickens. If you can believe that. To Josh's point about, we don't want to overburden our police department, and I would concur with that. We certainly do not want to do this. This is probably going to be hit and miss as I go here, but bear with me. I think maybe perhaps one of the things that we should consider is making or having this be a complaint-driven ordinance. None of us certainly want the police driving around, getting out of their car. Okay, all is quiet. I think it's got to be a complaint called in. I have a neighbor who's shooting these things off. I've talked to them, and if we allow Fridays and Saturdays throughout the year, I know personally I have gotten up early on Saturdays to go to photo shoots, and some people work on the weekends. They work on Saturday mornings. They get up and go in to Donley, to wherever. They get up early Sunday to go in. And if we allow Fridays, Saturdays, well, why don't we just throw Thursday in there too? And while we're at it, let's just do Wednesday. I think, if I'm not a tennis player, but one of the rules of tennis that I know is you don't play the middle. You play back or you play the dead. And if you play the middle on this by allowing Fridays and Saturdays, I think you're doing the same thing. I think you've got to have firm rules of the road. And we have listed in here a lot of things that you can do. Spinners, sparklers, smoke devices, noisemakers, party poppers, booby traps, snappers. I mean, the list is quite long. One thing I don't see on here is tannerite. That's loud. This is strictly just for the city of Warsaw. And as Jeremy has worked hard, as we have worked hard to try to encourage people to move into the city, to enjoy the amenities that the city has, we're getting more densely populated. And if you have someone who decides they're going to go out and set off a bunch of loud fireworks, say in an apartment complex, right over here at Carrie's new addition, or some of the property we annexed tonight. There's going to be 70 acres there with probably 50 acres buildable, and there's going to be, how many homes were you telling me, 70, 80? Okay, so that's pretty dense. And if you have somebody blowing up stuff, it's going to affect a lot of people. And you have people with heart conditions, they got to get up in the morning, new babies, maybe they're just out of surgery, they have hearing aids and those things go off. I don't really buy into the rights thing, because I think there are a few people that want to do this, and if they want to do it, they can go outside of the city or to a friend's house. But the majority of people in the city have rights too. And from what I'm hearing, they don't like these loud noises. I'm a little confused, and maybe this is a question for the attorney, but on page 2, item I, it says M80s, cherry bombs, silver salutes, any device banned by federal government. I guess I didn't know those were banned. But I know they probably go off. You can still get them, right?
Yeah, so I think one thing to keep in mind is Indiana statute is fairly broad on what it regulates with fireworks. The Indiana statute has a number of things that aren't really part of our fireworks ordinance that I think you as council people should keep in mind. It's an infraction if you shoot them off and you don't have an adult over the age of 18. So children cannot use any fireworks if there's not an adult present, and if they do, it's a Class C infraction. If you use them somewhere that's not an approved location, such as your own property, if you're using them someplace that's not approved, that's also a Class C infraction. So you have to have permission to use them where you're using them, or it could be a Class C infraction. That's already part of the state law. If you damage someone's property with a firework, that's a Class A misdemeanor. If you damage a person with a firework, that could be a D felony. If it causes death to them, it's a C felony. So there's some things that the state statute does address that's not part of this ordinance, that's in addition to the times and the dates, that's a little bit expansive on what you can do with fireworks. So state legislature handles some of those things that may be useful with some of the complaints about fireworks in the city, possibly. And I don't know, as a city attorney, I've heard members of our community come to numerous meetings and ask for some relief from that. I haven't heard excessive amounts from the police department or the fire department about that they're dealing with fireworks complaints. So I would guess there's very few people currently that are being the subject of any penalties under the current state statute for any violations of it.
Can we put in here, is it possible to put in here something about this being a complaint-based ordinance, even, and I'm just asking, even if we leave Fridays and Saturdays, unless there is a complaint. If it's okay on Friday and Saturday, but the neighbor comes over and says, hey man, you're waking up the baby, you're gonna have to quit, and it doesn't stop, that person then would have a recourse. There's a tool in that tool bag for them to say, hey, you can do it unless there's a complaint. I'm complaining, and it doesn't stop, he can call it in. Is that a possibility?
I would think no. I think one of the cornerstones of a ordinance or a law or government intervention would be every citizen needs to know what's prevented. And they all have to be treated equally. And so I think it's a really slippery slope to try to limit someone's behavior based upon who their neighbor might be and whether their neighbor doesn't like it or whether their neighbor's fine with it.
Well,
I think legally that would
conversely,
be
I know that a person near and dear to my heart who has had neighbors where members of the neighbor's family come from out of town, they don't live here, and just go crazy, doing fireworks.
But I think the reality of it is also, the reality could be, however restrictive it is, I would guess, and it's just an opinion, my guess would be kind of the opposite of that. It can be the Wild West if nobody's complaining, right? I don't see our Warsaw Police Department making a real effort to be proactive to go enforce fireworks unless there is a complaint. So,
So would the best recourse be to just make it across the board, not include Friday and Saturday, and that way if nobody cares, nobody calls it in, they can do what they want, but if there is a problem, you call it in, and then the police do have that tool in the toolbox to deal with the issue.
You could make the argument the other way. Why do you have to restrict it totally to have that happen? You can just leave it as it is, and people can still call it in, and there can still be recourse. So the argument could be made both ways.
I'm not paid to give my opinion about what the best recourse is for that. That's for all you to decide whether or not it's best to make it no fireworks, no additional ordinances. I know that the 3 people on the committee that I've met with numerous times have struggled with the idea of what to do specifically, and there are a lot of opinions out there. We've had the opinions of, certainly it causes real harm to people that have come in here and have suffered from PTSD and those things. I've had people contact me about this fireworks ordinance that say they make a living selling fireworks, and this is going to take money out of their pocket or food off their kids' table. I've had that end of the spectrum, talking about that, but
Which we know isn't totally true, because there's a whole list of days where the state says you can't.
I'm just telling you,
I know.
there's vendors that won't be positive about this.
Yeah. Do they even live in the city?
I don't know. I'm just telling you.
I know, I
a-
know, I'm just making the point.
This is
that
not
You may be hearing
simple.
from people who aren't even affected by this because they don't even live in the city.
And this is not simple, and
It's not simple. It's a tough one. It's a tough one. I think I'd have to agree with Cindy and Diane. I'd like to hear from the public before I take any action on this. I'm not prepared to do anything.
I think we've got someone here who we've heard from in the past that I'd like to give the opportunity to weigh in.
Okay?
Hi, Council. This is the 3rd time I've been in front of you, and this discussion is because of, partly me, because I'm the one that's brought it, here in front of you. Mike, part of your argument is if we restrict everything, my question would be, how many times have you called the police to report fireworks near your house as a noise complaint? If you're not utilizing the laws that are already there, then adding a more restrictive law would do no good. I think by meeting in the middle, and I understand your tennis term, I'm not a tennis player, I'm just Joe Blow. You have to meet in the middle somewhere. You can't always go far right, far left. There has to be a compromise in the middle, because otherwise everybody will be upset on the opposite side. And in the grand scheme of things, I know I've talked to Jack, Josh, I believe I talked to you. Cindy, I've talked to you. Excuse me. The grand scheme of things, this ordinance will affect maybe 200 people. Maybe 200. Those are the bad players in town. What this does is gives recourse to the other 14,800 that live here. Because right now, there is nothing. And by giving something to both sides, you know, I was the one that came and asked for the relief. I think that this is a great compromise. I get the relief, I can plan on the 2 days, and it gives restrictions, but it also gives consequence. And right now, I think the majority of the reason why nobody's contacting the police is because they don't know what the fireworks laws are. And they still don't. And I know when I've talked to Jack in, you know, multiple discussions, part of this is education. This is educating the public through this ordinance what the rules and restrictions are, because there's nothing at the point of sale. It's just, hey, nobody under the age of 18 can light these off. Okay, so what are the rules? Let an adult light it. Well, but there are rules to it. You know, you've got to be on your own property. You've got to have permission. There are, you know, consequences if somebody's firework lands on your house and starts your roof on fire. But you have to know that that's available. And if you don't know that that's available, why would you call the police? And when you do call the police right now with nothing on the books, state law says, hey, 11 to 9. Is it past 11? No. Well, if it continues after 11, call us back. And, you know, when you have that interaction with the police, how many times are you going to keep calling back? How many times are you going to say, well, you know, it's 11:01, I want to call right now. But they're done. So there's nothing that they can do. This is at least a good starting point. The nice thing is this ordinance it's not set in stone. This isn't something that's got a 10-year span on it. And we say that, hey, you know what? This is going to be rule for the next 10 years. This can be revisited yearly. You know, put something in place, see how it goes. If it needs to be more restricted because there have been more complaints, because again, I don't see many other people other than myself here talking about this issue. I know they'll come to you, you know, email, phone call, come into your business, talk to you. But to stand here and be publicly known as somebody that's complaining, they're not willing to do it. But if they're not willing to do it, then what recourse do we have?
That's what I'm trying to do, give you some recourse. I know I have talked to people shooting off fireworks. I didn't have to call the police. I went down and asked them to stop. But you have told me yourself. You've gone and talked to somebody. And it only made the matter worse.
Correct.
And you had no recourse. You couldn't do anything about it. So what I'm trying to do is help guys like you.
But this would help guys like me. Because it would give a timeline, and anybody that's outside of that timeline, now there is legal recourse to it.
Right.
I'm giving people, I don't want to say I'm giving, me personally, I'm willing to compromise with the idea of, hey, I'll give up 4 days out of my year to the potential of fireworks, because it's better than 365 that I have now. So it's a give and a take. I think that it gives people, you know, the flexibility, the freedom to go out and enjoy what they're doing, but it also gives the rest of us a little peace of mind knowing, hey, you know what? If something happens during the week, I have something to fall back on. You know, because you can't always go to your neighbor and say, hey, look, this is an issue, knock it off. Because some people, they just don't care about their neighbors. And
Exactly.
But
You're
this-
making my point for me. I don't understand.
This is a good first step because it's education. Because now this will be at the point of sales. This will be on social media.
I think that's a
rules
great
and
idea.
regulations. what will happen if you fail to comply with the rules? This is a good starting point. If in a year you've had more complaints and you want to go fully restrictive across the board, hey, you've got my vote for that. Or if in a year you say, you know what, this really hasn't worked out, we'd like to remove it from the table, I support that too. Because at least you guys are discussing it. At least this is coming up. At least we're talking about it. And that's all that when I came here last year, that's all I wanted was a discussion. And we're getting there. And I think we're really close to getting to the finish line. We just need to get it across the finish line.
Eric,
So-
I really appreciate you coming forward and the discussions I've had with you. And I think the education, particularly the 67.04 that we have and putting up the flyers where the fireworks are sold and everything so that everybody knows what the regulations are, is a really good start.
Right, and that's the thing, as it is now, the only thing that's on a fireworks display, if you go to Walmart, is, restricted sale, 18 and over. It doesn't state what the city, or what the state code is right now. And unless people are willing to go out and research it themselves, they don't know what the laws are. So they just think, well, I can light them off anytime. And that's where a lot of the issues come from. So I appreciate you guys' time. If you guys have questions, my information's available. Please feel free to reach out to me. We can discuss this until we're blue in the face. But I appreciate you guys' time tonight, and thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
And I think what I hear him saying is, Mike, you're saying restrict them completely, don't let anybody do it. Eric's saying, let's start with something less than that and see if we can start to get some cooperation and also get people thinking about the effect of what they do on the people around them. So this ordinance provides that starting point. And if we continue to get complaints and people are really unhappy about the Fridays and Saturdays, what Eric is saying is, yes, we could go more restrictive. If we do nothing right now, we just continue in the same situation that we've been in, and it doesn't help anyone. So, I mean, we have some choices right now. We could table this, but I wouldn't recommend it because I think we need to move forward. We could take a vote on it on the first reading and trust our media partners to get it out there. We want to hear from you. And then when we come back on the second reading, you'll have more information from people in town. And, we've changed things from first vote to second vote.
Yeah, you kind of took the words right out of my mouth. I think it's time. We've been talking for a while. I think it's time to see if there's enough support to pass it on first reading. I know traditionally in the past, the second reading, there's typically more public involvement if there is the need for that. So I think with the discussion, with the first reading, it certainly will elicit some conversation. If there's not support on this, then I think let the chips fall where they may. But Diane, I agree, and I was going to suggest that we consider this, and Jack, I'll leave that up to you, how you all want to proceed, but I think it's time to at least consider it on first reading, understanding that those that want more information, I do feel are going to get it.
I definitely want to hear more.
First, I'd like to thank Eric for stepping up.
Yes.
The young man shows a tremendous amount of maturity. He's not here saying that I want everything to be restricted. He's not another person saying, I don't want anything restricted. He's willing to meet towards the middle. We see so little of that today, folks. And we've got a chance to do that here tonight, to show everybody how to come together and live with each other. This is a community, and that's what it takes. And so with that, I will move that we accept Ordinance 2021-1102 as written
On first reading.
on first reading.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Diane. Any further discussion? All right, I'd ask you all in favor to raise your right hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All those opposed? 1.
I'm going to abstain. I'm going to wait for more information from the public.
Okay, the vote passes 5 to 1 to 1 abstention by Councilman Glondaris.
And then this is an open invitation for both us and Eric. If you care about this, show up at the next council meeting or call us in between and let us, or email us or text us or whatever and let us know.
Let your voice be heard. This
I
is your
agree.
opportunity.
I was prepared to vote no, but now I want to see it move forward, and I want to see people come forward and let us know what they think.
All right, thank you all. Yes,
Excuse me, do you want the second reading at the next council meeting?
yes.
Yes.
All right. So other matters to come before the council. I know we've addressed in an email form the reception of the 1782 notice last Thursday, November 10th, by statute and by the notification on the notice itself we have to respond. Our last day to respond is November 22nd, which is next Monday. I have asked Lynn to prepare an advertisement for a meeting this Thursday, November 18th at 5 p.m. To consider our response to the 1782 notice, which typically involves handling our line 1 cuts, asking you to approve the line 1 cuts. That reduces our spending, and then we're able to come up with a final rate. We're looking at somewhere in the low 120s. I think I'd mentioned that prior. Last year we were 119, and we're probably go up a few cents this year, keep up with the growth factor. So that's kind of where we're at now. And again, those line 1 cuts will be presented. To that end, I also wanted to let you know, and I've asked, Jeff's been very patient, I wanted him to address, we had a transfer error on the DLGF software when Lynn was putting the information from Form 3, which was a notice to taxpayers, putting on to the actual ordinance, which is Form 4. Several of the budgeted amounts were left off of the form. The levies were put on, so we did, on the 1782 notice, it shows that we've asked for these levies, we have our funds coming, but there's 9 funds that there were no appropriations put on these funds. So right now, that money, if we left it as is, would go into our reserves, and no, we would not have the authorization to spend it. So again, it was a transfer error on the software when we went from Form 3 to Form 4. We were surprised that the DLGF did not catch it. Nonetheless, here we are, and there's an easy way out of this, essentially we're going to have to do an additional appropriation after the first of the year. But I wanted Jeff to address this. We called Jeff right away to explain the error, and we wanted to make sure that there indeed was a way out of this, and I'll let Jeff discuss that.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And really, probably not a whole lot to add other than what you just shared. I mean, as most of you probably know, the DLGF is pretty rigid when it comes to these types of things. We see this every year, maybe not this exact issue, but similar, and this issue. But, and it all, folks are getting their 1782 notices, and we're getting calls, oh, my budget wasn't approved, or my levy shows 0, which thankfully that's not the case for the city. But it really all ties back to the publications and what's on the Form 4, and that's what DLGF holds local units to. It's what is on the Form 4. In this case, Mayor, as you pointed out, there was just I just call it a technicality or technical error where those numbers weren't pulled through to the Form 4, so they were shown as 0. DLGF receives that information, there's 0, so that's what they approve. But again, the good news is, the levy is approved. I've seen communities that didn't get their levies approved because of either they didn't publish the right public hearing date or didn't adopt at the right time or something of that nature. And fortunately, they're just kind of out of luck. But the city will get the levy, obviously, per the 1782 notice. So the implication is exactly that. And you just, when you get into 2022, you just will need to do an additional appropriation to approve the spending of those dollars up to the amount that was intended to be on the Form 4. So,
Questions?
Yep.
While Jeff's here. Okay. Jeff, thank you so much for sticking around. I appreciate it.
Yep. My pleasure.
But it's something that we haven't dealt with, and again, a little bit of a hiccup in the software, and we would hope that DLGF would have given us a little bit of a, hey, why isn't there a budget on here? But they didn't. They just sent it back with, here's your money. You got $4.5 million, but you can't spend it on anything because there's no budget listed. So thank you, Jeff, and Lynn, I know you've worked hard on this too. Appreciate, we've spent a little time scrambling trying to figure this out, but as it turns out, it's a very simple fix. So we will get the 1782 notice out to you to take a look at, as well as those line 1 cuts, and then we'll have some discussion Thursday, and we'll talk about where we're going to try and get the rate dialed into based on what the levy says we can spend and what our spending plan is. So, and then obviously our cuts. Any questions? So 5 o'clock Thursday night, we'll advertise that, and I don't think it'll be too long, but we want to spend enough time to answer your questions, especially given this circumstance. Mike?
I was just going to say, as you saw in my response, I have a prior commitment that came before this thing came up. I will be here.
Okay.
Just wanted to let you know, I'm not going to stand you up. I'll be here. If I'm a little late, just tell a couple jokes or something. But I'll be here.
All right, thank you. All right, anyone else?
Do you want to mention the meeting tomorrow night?
Yes, I was just making sure there was no other meeting, interest, or discussion on the 1782. Tomorrow night, there is a US 30 coalition, not coalition, a local meeting with the county planning and county elected officials, with our planning department and myself. We'll be at the PAC at the high school at 6:30. The meeting will basically lay out the option of a freeway on the existing US 30 corridor route. So I think
That's if they decide.
well,
Yeah.
we will just be presenting that route. That's what we have looked at here within the city. So just it's a concept that we want to get out to the community. We want the community to see how possibly this could look. But obviously, we'll talk a little bit about the planning and environmental linkage study that NDOT has authorized and is funded, and they've chosen their consultants, and that study will begin probably early of spring in 22, take 16, 18, 20 months, whatever, probably potentially up to 2 years to look at everything. So NDOT will be making the final decisions. NDOT will be engineering, acquiring right away, spending the money, and will hence be making the final decision. Keep in mind, this is from a timeline, we're not looking something next couple of years. We're probably looking at minimum of 10 to 12 years. And then construction could be another 5. But, those are just wild numbers.
I was hoping, I thought I might be able to live long enough to see it, and that's,
So again, the goal tomorrow is to discuss the PEL and then dive into the concept of keeping US 30 on the existing route.
yeah.
So thanks, Diane, for the reminder. All right, anything to come before the council? Final items? All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
Thank you all.
Okay,
Lynn, anything to sign?
good discussion. Yep, thank you. Absolutely.
Good discussion, thanks, Mike. Good, let's keep that, man.
That brought it home to me. I was just on a rampage the other day about handle letters. Consider, and this way the fun stuff.
I went to Indianapolis.
And it's in every
I know.
I was on Route 70.
It's very fabric of our